The morning sky above Denver was painted in shades of gold and lavender, the kind of dawn that promised a smooth flight and an easy day. Flight 237 was scheduled to depart at 8:05 a.m. for Atlanta, a routine cross-country trip that, on paper, looked like nothing more than another checkmark on the airline's schedule. Passengers sipped coffee, shuffled boarding passes, and scrolled through their phones. The air smelled faintly of jet fuel and cinnamon rolls from the nearby cafe. In seat 11A, near the left window, Sarah Holden buckled herself in and stared quietly out at the glimmering runway. She looked like any other traveler, neat hair tied in a low bun, crisp blue jacket, a calm expression that gave away nothing. But beneath that calm exterior was a mind trained to read weather fronts, wind speeds, and engine tones almost instinctively. Years of flying fighters had wired her brain differently. Even as a passenger, she couldn't stop analyzing. The engines roared to life, sending a low vibration through the cabin. Passengers leaned back as the aircraft taxied toward the runway. Sarah closed her eyes for a brief moment. She still loved that sound, the deep growl of turbines, the mechanical heartbeat that once defined her world. But that world felt far away now. 3 years earlier, she'd been known by a different name. Call sign Hawk 1, a decorated U.S. Air Force pilot, one of the few women to lead a combat squadron in Afghanistan. She had seen things most people never would: tracer rounds cutting through desert nights, the desperate radio calls of friends under fire. And she had made choices that still haunted her dreams. When her final mission ended with a near-fatal crash landing that cost her a wingman, she left the Air Force. Physically fine, emotionally shattered. Civilian life was supposed to be her escape, commercial flying, training younger pilots, something quiet. But after a while, even that faded. She took a break, promising herself she'd only fly again when it didn't hurt to be in the air. Now, on Flight 237, she wasn't flying, at least not officially. She was a paying passenger heading to Atlanta for a leadership conference, trying to leave her old call sign in the past. The irony, of course, was that fate had other plans. As the aircraft lifted off the ground, Sarah felt that familiar tug of gravity pulling against her body. The wheels tucked in with a satisfying thump, and Denver shrank beneath a blanket of cloud. She allowed herself a small smile. No matter how many miles she put between herself and her past, the sky always felt like home. She glanced across the aisle at a young boy pressing his face to the window, wide-eyed as he watched the clouds roll by. "First time flying?" she asked gently. He nodded eagerly. "Yeah. My dad's picking me up in Atlanta." "That's great," Sarah said. "You picked a good day for it. Smooth skies." The boy grinned, and she turned back to her window, her smile fading into thought. Smooth skies. If only life worked that way. An hour into the flight, breakfast service began. The aroma of coffee and reheated eggs filled the cabin. Flight attendants moved gracefully between rows, smiling with practiced ease. The captain's calm voice came over the intercom. "Good morning, folks. We're cruising comfortably at 31,000 feet. Weather looks clear all the way to Atlanta. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the flight." Sarah sipped her coffee, letting the captain's tone wash over her. Confident, steady, almost too smooth. She remembered using that same voice during missions, speaking evenly even as her cockpit filled with warning lights. The art of sounding calm while the world trembled around you, a pilot's greatest trick. She closed her eyes again and let her mind drift. It was strange how ordinary the world could look when disaster was just waiting to announce itself. The soft rumble of engines, the chatter of passengers, the laughter of a couple across the aisle, everything perfectly normal. Then faintly, a sound changed. It wasn't something most people would notice. A subtle pitch shift in the left engine's hum, a slight flicker in the cabin lights. Sarah's eyes snapped open. Her instincts whispered something's off. She scanned the cabin, nothing visible, but years of experience told her that mechanical failure never gave much warning. She leaned forward slightly, watching the cockpit door, now closed and locked. Probably just a power fluctuation, she told herself. Nothing more. She tried to relax, but her fingers drummed against the armrest unconsciously, an old pilot's habit. 10 minutes passed. Then came the first sign. A muffled thud. A gasp from the flight attendant in the forward galley. The cabin lights flickered again, once, twice, and the intercom crackled with static. Then the captain's voice returned, but it wasn't calm anymore. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated. Flight attendants, take your positions." Sarah's stomach tightened. The turbulence wasn't bad, but something in his tone wasn't weather-related. A low murmur spread through the cabin. The plane leveled off abruptly, then dipped slightly. A coffee cup slid off a tray and shattered on the floor. From her seat, Sarah could see the flight attendants, whispering urgently near the galley phone. One of them, pale and wide-eyed, grabbed the intercom. "If there's a doctor on board, please make yourself known immediately." Gasps rippled across the cabin. Sarah unbuckled her seatbelt without hesitation. Her mind switched into a different mode. No hesitation, no fear, just clarity. As she stepped into the aisle, passengers turned to look at her, sensing the authority in her stride. "What's happening?" a man asked. "Medical emergency," she said quickly. "Stay calm." The lead attendant saw her and motioned toward the cockpit. "It's the captain," she whispered. He collapsed, not breathing. Sarah's pulse quickened. Without another word, she pushed past and reached the door. The co-pilot opened it for her, his face drained of color. Inside, alarms blinked crimson. The captain slumped motionless against his seatbelt. Oxygen mask dangling. The plane slightly banked left. Sarah knelt, checked his pulse. Nothing. Her chest tightened, but her focus remained sharp. "He's gone," she said softly. "You're flying solo?" The co-pilot nodded shakily. "Autopilot's glitching. I'm trying to stabilize, but the system's not responding." Sarah glanced at the instrument panel, reading it in a single sweep. The altitude indicator flickered. Her hands moved automatically, flipping switches she hadn't touched in years. "You're overcompensating on the pitch trim," she said. "Let me." He hesitated. "Who are you?" Sarah met his eyes, her voice low but firm. "I'm a pilot. Sarah Holden. Call sign Hawk 1. The name hit him like a shockwave. Even in civilian circles, her reputation had lingered. The pilot who saved 2 jets under heavy fire, the one who disappeared from the skies afterward. The co-pilot's mouth opened slightly. "That Hawk 1? Before she could answer, the aircraft jolted violently. Warning sirens screamed. A red light flashed across the console. Autopilot disengaged. Sarah slid into the captain's seat, heart pounding but movements precise. She grabbed the yoke, hands steady. "Talk to a TC," she ordered. "Tell them Flight 237 is declaring an emergency. The captain's incapacitated. I'm taking command." Her voice filled the cockpit, clear, controlled, unshaken. And somewhere, thousands of miles away, her old call sign echoed across an open frequency for the first time in years. Air traffic control froze. "Say again?" "This is Sarah Holden, Hawk 1, taking control of Flight 237. The silence that followed wasn't confusion. It was recognition. The cockpit was chaos. Pure, deafening, flashing chaos. Red and amber lights strobed across the control panels, warning tones layered over each other in a shrill electronic panic. The aircraft trembled as turbulence buffeted it, and the steady hum that once comforted passengers now sounded like a desperate roar. Sarah Holden slid fully into the captain's seat, tightening the harness. The familiar resistance of the yoke in her hands was both alien and intimate, like touching an old friend she'd never expected to see again. "Autopilot's down," the co-pilot said, voice trembling. "Pitch trim won't stabilize. I think the elevator control's fluctuating." Sarah didn't answer immediately. Her eyes swept the instrument panel, absorbing it all in seconds. Airspeed, fluctuating. Altitude, dropping. Cabin pressure, stable for now. She felt the rhythm of the aircraft through her fingertips, the subtle roll, the uneven vibration. The plane wasn't just malfunctioning. It was confused. The computer was fighting its own controls. "Disconnect the FCC manually," she ordered. The co-pilot hesitated. "That'll cut all automation." She turned her head sharply. "That's the idea." He obeyed, hands shaking as he flipped the guarded switches. The alarm tone changed. Fewer beeps now, but lower, angrier. The flight systems were officially in manual override. "All right," Sarah murmured, exhaling slowly, her voice level. "Now she's listening to me." The aircraft bucked again, a sharp drop that made both of them lurch forward. Outside, clouds thickened into gray spirals, blotting out sunlight. The horizon tilted, and for a moment, the plane's right wing dipped too far. Sarah countered. Quick, steady pressure on the yoke, and the horizon straightened like a soldier called to attention. The co-pilot stared at her. "You've done this before." She didn't look at him. "A few times." The intercom buzzed, the flight attendants frantic. "Cockpit, this is Emily. The passengers are panicking. We need instructions." Sarah pressed the COM switch. "Tell them to stay seated and buckle up tight." "You're doing fine, Emily. We've got control." Her tone carried authority, warmth, and not an ounce of fear. It was the same tone she'd once used to calm rookie pilots in mid-air firefights. She switched to the emergency channel. "Denver Center, this is Flight 237. Captain incapacitated. Aircraft in manual control. Request emergency descent vectors." Static crackled. Then a male voice replied, slow, uncertain. "Flight 237, did you say? Hawk 1? The words froze Sarah for half a heartbeat. The use of her old call sign, one she hadn't spoken in years, hit her like a punch of memory. Afghanistan. The dust. The fire. The voices screaming for coordinates. She forced the memories away. "That's correct. Hawk 1. I need immediate heading and descent clearance." "Copy, Hawk 1. Stand by." The channel went silent for a moment, then returned. This time, the controller's tone had changed completely. "Flight 237. Vectors approved. You are cleared to descend to flight level 280. Maintain heading 085. We've alerted the Air Force Command. You'll have company soon." Sarah frowned. "Company?" "F-22s out of Tyndall. Standard escort procedure for civilian emergencies at your altitude." "Of course. Standard protocol. If a civilian jet declared distress and military radar picked up irregular patterns, they'd scramble fighters to visually confirm." She knew it wasn't suspicion. It was safety. But still, the irony wasn't lost on her. The Air Force was sending Raptors to watch over her. She glanced at the co-pilot, who still looked dazed. "What's your name?" "Jason," he said quietly. "First Officer Jason Grant." "All right, Jason. I'm flying this bird, but I need you with me. Run checklists. Monitor hydraulics. Keep your head clear." He swallowed hard, then nodded. "Yes, ma'am." Sarah steadied the yoke again. The storm front ahead was building, thick, dark columns of moisture towering like walls. On radar, It looked like a writhing red monster, pulsing with energy. They'd have to go through it. There was no safe way around without burning too much fuel. "Hold on," she murmured. "We're not out of this yet." The plane shuddered again, a deep, guttural vibration that rippled through the fuselage. Overhead compartments rattled. A scream echoed faintly from the cabin. Jason glanced back nervously. "They're scared." "They should be," Sarah said, her voice low but calm. "But we're not done yet." She adjusted the trim manually, watching the nose respond sluggishly, then more smoothly. "Good girl," she whispered to the aircraft. "Stay with me?" As the minutes ticked on, Sarah found her rhythm again. The feel of the plane, the hum of the engines, the steady pulse of altitude corrections, it was all muscle memory. Her breathing slowed. She was back in her element. Jason looked at her in awe. "You really are Hawk 1. She cracked the faintest smile. "Don't spread that around." Then came another voice, not from air traffic control this time, but a low, encrypted military channel. She recognized the frequency immediately. Old habits, old ghosts. "Flight 237. This is Raptor 2-1. We're inbound from your 7 o'clock. 3 minutes. Jason blinked. "F-22s?" Sarah nodded slowly. "Yeah, Guardians of the Sky." She switched frequencies. "Raptor 2-1, this is Flight 237. Appreciate the escort. Be advised, we're flying manual with partial system loss. Situation stable for now." A pause then. "Copy that, ma'am." "Wait, Hawk 1? Is that you?" Her throat tightened. The voice was unmistakable. Major Collins, one of her old wingmen. The young pilot she'd mentored years ago. The one who used to joke that he'd never survive without her watching his six. "Collins," she said quietly. "It's been a while. Ma'am, I can't believe it's you. We've got you on visual now. We'll stay with you all the way home." Jason looked between her and the radio. Disbelief etched across his face. "You trained him?" "Something like that," she said softly. Through the cockpit glass, 2 sleek gray shapes appeared in the distance, fast, graceful, slicing through the clouds. The F-22s leveled off beside the airliner, wings shimmering in the sunlight that pierced through breaks in the storm. Passengers on the left side of the plane gasped, pressing their faces to the windows. To them, it must have looked like a movie, 2 fighter jets escorting a commercial plane through thunderclouds. But to Sarah, it wasn't spectacle. It was memory. It was loyalty. She tapped the come again. "Collins, keep your distance, but stay visual. We're stable for now. If this thing goes south, I'll need your eyes." "Understood, Hawk 1. We've got your back." Just like old times. Sarah exhaled through her nose, her grip steady on the controls. For the first time since the chaos began, she allowed herself a small flicker of relief. She wasn't alone up here. Jason looked at her again, something between respect and awe in his gaze. "You know, most people would have panicked by now." Sarah smiled faintly. "That's the thing about panic. It doesn't keep planes in the air." Outside, lightning flashed, brilliant, jagged, violent. The clouds swirled around them like ocean waves. The F-22s danced alongside, matching altitude perfectly. It was beautiful in a terrifying way. The ballet of man, machine, and storm. "Jason," Sarah said quietly, eyes locked on the horizon. "When this is over, remind me to thank whoever decided to put a fighter escort on civilian emergencies." He chuckled nervously. "You can thank yourself. You're the reason they learned half these protocols." Sarah didn't reply. She didn't need to. Deep down, she knew he was right. Her career had shaped more than she ever realized. And now, fate had brought it full circle. For a brief, fragile moment, peace returned to the cockpit. The alarms were silent. The controls responded. The horizon was level. But in the back of her mind, she knew the real storm was still ahead, one that radar couldn't predict. She tightened her grip on the yoke and whispered, almost to herself, "We're not done yet, Hawk One." The rhythmic hum of the engine steadied, though turbulence still rolled through the clouds like distant thunder. The aircraft was under control, for now. But the calm that followed chaos always carried an edge. Sarah Holden sat in the captain's seat, eyes fixed on the endless gray horizon ahead. Her reflection shimmered faintly on the glass, the face of someone who had walked away from the skies, but had somehow found herself right back in them. Outside, the F-22 Raptors held formation, cutting sleek silhouettes against the stormlight. Their presence should have comforted her, but instead, it pulled her backward in time, to dust, to heat, to the memory of a night when everything had changed. Jason Grant, the co-pilot, adjusted the comm frequencies beside her. He kept glancing at her, curiosity mingling with awe. "So," he began carefully, "you really were Hawk One." She didn't look at him. "A long time ago." He hesitated, lowering his voice. "You flew in Afghanistan, right?" Her fingers tightened slightly on the throttle. "Yes," Jason nodded, unsure whether to continue. "They said you saved a squadron out there, got them home when nobody else could." Sarah gave a small, humorless smile. "They said a lot of things." Outside, lightning flared across the clouds, momentarily illuminating her face. The glow revealed a stillness that came from years of discipline, but also the weight of something unspoken. Jason sensed it and wisely fell silent. The radio crackled again. "Flight 237. This is Raptor 2-1. Storm conditions are intensifying ahead. Recommend course adjustment to 120. Sarah pressed the transmit button. "Copy that, 2-1? Adjusting course." The Raptors shifted slightly, their wings gleaming like blades. The sight sent a ripple through her chest, admiration mixed with memory. She had once led aircraft like those, commanding her squadron with the same certainty now required to guide this crippled commercial jet. She exhaled slowly, forcing herself back to the present. The passengers behind them didn't know her history. To them, she was just the woman who had stepped up when everything went wrong. That was enough. But to the men flying alongside her, the ones calling her Hawk One, she was something else entirely. Afghanistan, 8 years earlier. The desert night burned red with tracer fire. Over the radio, voices overlapped in panic. "Eagle 4, I've lost hydraulics." "Mayday, Mayday, I'm hit." Sarah's voice cut through, sharp as steel. "Stay in formation. I've got visual on the convoy. Keep your eyes on me." Her F-16 danced through enemy fire, engines screaming as she banked low. She saw the convoy of American soldiers pinned down below, trapped in an ambush. If they couldn't clear the road in minutes, they'd be overrun. Her radar pinged, incoming missiles. She should have pulled back, but she didn't. Instead, she dove. Her countermeasures deployed, flares streaking across the sky. "Eagle 4, break left." "Now," she commanded. A blinding flash lit the ground. Her HUD flickered missile impact nearby. The shockwave hit her jet like a hammer, rattling every bone in her body. Warning screamed in her ears. "You're hit, Hawk One. Eject. Negative." She barked. "Not until they're clear." Her wingman's voice, young, scared, trembling, came through next. "Ma'am, you're taking heavy fire. Focus on your flight path, Collins." She snapped. "You'll make it home." Seconds later, she saw his jet explode in the distance. The silence that followed was deafening. When she finally landed that night, her jet was barely holding together. The canopy cracked, warning lights glowing like embers. The hangar crew rushed toward her, but she just sat there, helmet still on, staring at the empty sky. Collins didn't make it back. And though the mission saved 24 soldiers, she'd never forgiven herself for losing him. Now, years later, sitting in another cockpit, older, wiser, but still haunted, she could almost hear his voice echo through the static. "Stay in formation, Collins. You'll make it home." She shook the thought away, gripping the controls tighter. The storm ahead mirrored her thoughts, dark, violent, and closing in fast. Jason glanced at her, unsure if he should say something. He could sense she wasn't entirely here. Part of her was flying through two skies at once. "Sarah," he said quietly, "we're still dropping altitude, slow but steady. You want me to check fuel calculations?" She blinked, grounding herself. "Yes, do it. We'll need to divert if we burn too much in the headwinds." He worked quickly, scanning numbers. "At this rate, we can make Montgomery or Jackson. Weather looks clearer south." She nodded. "Tell ATC we're diverting to Montgomery Regional. Priority landing, emergency medical on board." Jason relayed the message, and the tower responded with approval. Outside, the storm deepened. Lightning forked across the clouds, thunder rumbling so loudly it vibrated through the fuselage. The F-22s stayed close, their wings slicing through rain like knives. "Flight 237, this is Raptor 2-1. Collins' voice came again. "Visibility's dropping fast. We'll light the way for you. Keep on our tail lights." Sarah smiled faintly. "You always did like taking point." "Old habits die hard, ma'am." For the first time that day, she felt something close to peace. The past hadn't vanished. It had come full circle. The men who had once followed her through war were now leading her through a storm. Jason looked at her again, studying her composure. "Do you ever miss it?" he asked quietly. She didn't answer right away. "Miss what?" "The Air Force, flying fighters. Being Hawk 1. Her eyes softened. "Every single day," she admitted. "But some skies aren't meant to be flown twice." The cockpit fell silent again, except for the rhythmic pulse of the instruments. The weight of her words lingered, a mix of pride and pain that only those who'd lived through both could understand. Then, another thought struck her, one that made her glance at the window. "Jason, how's our passenger status?" He checked the cabin readouts. "Stable. They're scared, but no major injuries. Crew's holding it together." "Good," she said. "We'll get them home. All of them." Outside, rain streaked across the windshield in silver ribbons. The storm's edge loomed closer, walls of darkness spinning with flashes of white. Inside, every gauge glowed dimly, steady but strained. Sarah's mind sharpened. Her breathing slowed, her senses narrowing into focus. The fear, the noise, the past, all of it dissolved into one thing, the mission. She keyed the radio again. "Raptor 2-1, Hawk 1 here. Storm density looks high on my radar. Recommend you pull above layer 2. "Negative, ma'am," Collins replied firmly. "We're staying with you." She almost smiled. He'd learned well. For a long moment, the only sound in the cockpit was rain hammering metal and the steady hiss of radio static. Sarah stared straight ahead, her jaw set, every muscle tuned to the pulse of the aircraft. The past might have broken her once, but up here, where the world shrank into clouds and thunder, she remembered who she truly was. Not a fallen pilot, not a ghost of old wars, but a leader, a protector, a woman who could still bring people home. And as the storm began to close its fist around Flight 237, Sarah Holden whispered under her breath, not to herself, but to the man she once couldn't save, "I'll get them home this time, Collins. I promise." The storm had swollen into a wall of chaos, a vast churning mass of cloud and lightning that stretched across the southern horizon. From the cockpit, it looked like the sky itself had split open. The Boeing trembled under the weight of turbulence, rain hammering against its nose cone-like fists. Warning lights blinked amber across the panel. Autopilot disengaged, navigation beacons flickering, crosswinds biting at the wings. Captain Sarah Holden steadied the yoke, her knuckles white beneath the gloves. Every muscle in her arms burned as she fought the wind shear. The engine screamed in protest. Jason Grant, a young co-pilot, kept reading out altitude, speed, and heading like a heartbeat rhythm. "Altitude 9,000, dropping to 8,500, he called out. "Keep it steady," she replied, voice calm though her heart pounded. "Don't fight the turbulence, ride through it." The plane shuddered violently, throwing a suitcase from the overhead bin into the aisle. Gasps erupted from the cabin. Sarah didn't flinch. "Fasten seatbelts, keep calm," she said into the PA, her tone steady and sure. But behind the calm, her eyes tracked the radar screen. 2 green dots, the F-22 Raptors held position just behind them, unwavering despite the storm. And then, through the lightning flashes, they appeared. 2 silver streaks slicing through black clouds, lights glowing faintly beneath their wings. The Raptors moved in perfect symmetry, cutting through the storm with impossible grace. Even from inside the cockpit, their presence radiated power and precision. Jason stared through the windshield, awestruck. "There, right on us," he breathed. Sarah nodded slightly. "They're not here to show off, Jason. They're here to make sure we don't disappear." Through the radio, a familiar voice broke through static. "Flight 237, Raptor 2-1. Visual confirmed. You're looking solid now. We're with you all the way." The word ma'am hit differently this time. Respect, recognition, brotherhood. Sarah pressed the mic. "Copy that, 2-1? We're grateful for the escort. Wouldn't have it any other way, Hawk 1. That name again, Hawk 1, a call sign she hadn't heard in 8 years. Every time they said it, her chest tightened with a mix of pride and pain. The Air Force had retired her name when she left. Yet now, in the middle of a storm, her old squadron had brought it back to life. Jason looked at her curiously. "They really know you, don't they?" She didn't answer. Instead, she adjusted the trim and stared through the sheets of rain. Outside, the Raptors began shifting positions, one rising higher, the other dropping below. They created a protective arc, a living shield around the passenger jet. Inside the cabin, passengers pressed their faces against the windows. Someone shouted, "Fighter jets! They're protecting us." The fear that had hung in the air for hours began to melt into stunned silence. People whispered prayers, others simply stared, transfixed by the sight of 2 sleek guardians cutting through the storm. Lightning cracked again, brighter than before, and for a second, the cockpit was washed in blinding white. The sound rolled across the fuselage like artillery fire. Sarah blinked the light from her eyes, scanning the gauges. Jason pointed at the right engine's temp reading. "We're spiking. Engine 2's running hot." She swore under her breath. "Keep an eye on it. If it hits 950, we feather it. Understood?" Another blast of turbulence slammed them sideways. The wings flexed under the strain, groaning audibly. The plane's nose pitched down, altitude plummeting. "Pulling up," Jason shouted. Sarah braced her arms, hauled the yoke back, forcing the aircraft's nose level again. "Easy. Don't overcorrect." They steadied at 7,000 feet, the instruments leveling out again. A long silence followed, broken only by the steady beeping of the navigation alarm. Her voice returned to the radio. "Raptor 2-1, we're holding 7,000, turbulence moderate to severe. Any path through this?" There was a pause. Then Colin's voice came through. Older now, deeper, but unmistakable. Negative visual, Hawk 1. But there's a break in the storm 15 miles southeast. We'll lead you through. Sarah smiled faintly, despite the chaos. Copy that. Lead the way. Always, ma'am. The Raptors surged forward, one lighting its afterburners briefly as a beacon. Sarah adjusted their heading to match. The nose of the Boeing pointed directly into the path of lightning, rain and roaring wind, yet she followed without hesitation. Jason stole a glance at her. How are you this calm? She didn't take her eyes off the instruments. Because panic doesn't change physics. But aren't you afraid? She looked out the window at the Raptors dancing through the rain. Terrified, she admitted softly. But fear's just fuel if you use it right. He nodded, gripping his controls tighter. For the first time, he began to understand what it meant to fly beside someone who'd seen combat, who'd lost everything but still flew straight into the storm. As the minutes stretched, the storm grew fiercer. Lightning flared all around them, painting the Raptors in flashes of white and gold. The sound was a constant roar, rain, thunder, engines, alarms. Yet through it all, Sarah kept her voice steady. Altitude 6800. Heading 120. Maintain course. Jason read back the data automatically. Fuel check complete. 2 hours of burn left. Good. We'll need half of that to get to Montgomery. Outside, the first signs of lighter sky began to appear through the clouds, faint, pale streaks of blue between the thunderheads. The storm was thinning. Colin's voice broke through again. Flight 237. You're clear of primary turbulence. Follow our tail. We'll guide you through the last cell. Sarah exhaled, tension easing from her shoulders. Copy 2-1. Nice flying. We learned from the best. That made her pause. Her throat tightened slightly, but she said nothing. The clouds broke fully at last. Sunlight burst through in brilliant gold, reflecting off the wet fuselage. The passengers cheered from behind the cockpit door, relief washing over the cabin. Jason grinned. We're through. Sarah's hands loosened on the yoke. Not home yet, but close. Down below, the land emerged, fields, roads, and small towns glinting under the clearing sky. The air smoothed out, engines humming normally again. The Raptors moved slightly ahead, one banking left, one right, like angels parting the clouds. Flight 237. This is Raptor 2-1. Montgomery Tower has you on radar. Weather is clear. You're cleared to descend when ready. Sarah's voice softened. Thank you, 2-1. Couldn't have done it without you. There was a pause, and then the reply came, low and reverent. We'd follow you anywhere, Hawk 1. The channel went silent. For a moment, she just sat there, eyes fixed on the horizon. Jason looked at her, but didn't speak. Something in her expression told him this was more than a flight. It was a homecoming. Sarah reached for the PA switch. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Holden. We've cleared the storm. We'll begin our descent shortly. Thank you for your patience and courage today. Applause erupted from the cabin. She could almost hear the sighs of relief, the whispered prayers of gratitude. She turned off the mic and leaned back, staring at the faint contrails of the Raptors ahead. Collins and his partner were still there, silent, steady, watchful. The woman who had once been Hawk 1 was no longer hiding behind a desk, no longer grounded by ghosts. She was back where she belonged, in the sky, in command, doing what she was born to do. Jason adjusted the altitude dial. You think they'll stay with us all the way down? Sarah smiled faintly. They always do. As the sun broke fully through the clouds, the two F-22s descended in perfect sync, guiding the passenger plane toward the safety of Montgomery. For the passengers, It was a miracle of flight. For Sarah Holden, it was something deeper. A reunion of souls bound by courage, loss, and loyalty. The escorts had appeared when she needed them most. But soon, she would learn that the storm outside was nothing compared to the one waiting on the ground. The questions, the recognition, and the moment when her true identity would echo through every military channel in the country. The skies over Montgomery, Alabama, had never looked so calm. After nearly an hour of chaos, the clouds had broken apart into streaks of pale gold. The sun hung low, washing the world below in light that felt almost holy. From 8,000 feet, Captain Sarah Holden could see the runway far in the distance, long, narrow, shining with recent rain. But between her and that safety stretched one of the hardest descents she'd ever have to make. The right engine's temperature was still unstable. One hydraulic system was half responsive, and the entire control system had taken a beating through the storm. She could feel it through the yoke, the resistance, the sluggish delay. A plane wanted to fight her. Beside her, Jason Grant ran the landing checklist aloud, his voice steady but tight. Flaps set for approach. Gear ready for manual release. Fuel left tank balanced. ATC cleared for emergency landing on runway 27. Sarah nodded. Copy that. Let's bring them home. Her voice was calm, even gentle, but her heartbeat was racing. In all her years as a fighter pilot, she had faced missiles, near-death dives, and battle zones that turned the horizon red. But this felt heavier, because this time it wasn't soldiers who trusted her. It was families, children, lives she'd never met. The radio hissed. Flight 237. This is Montgomery Tower. Emergency crews are standing by. You're cleared to descend at your discretion. She pressed the mic. Copy, Montgomery. Beginning final descent. Roger that. Flight 237. Godspeed. She almost smiled at that. Godspeed. A phrase pilots whispered to one another before missions, before takeoffs that might be their last. Jason's hand hovered near the throttle. You ready, Captain? Always. Outside, the two F-22 Raptors remained in formation, one above, one below, wings gleaming in the morning light. They had followed her all the way from the storm's heart, silent guardians cutting through open air. Through the headset came Colin's voice, firm but softer now. Hawk 1, Raptor 2-1. We'll stay with you through touchdown. You're looking good on our scope. Sarah adjusted her heading slightly. Appreciate it, 2-1. Let's make this a clean one. You always did? Her eyes flicked to the side window. For a second, she could see one of the Raptors flying almost level, close enough that she could make out the pilot's helmet turning toward her. He gave a slow, deliberate salute. Something twisted in her chest. She had saluted countless times before, but this one, silent, through glass and air, hit different. She returned the gesture. The descent began. The nose tilted downward, the engine's shifting pitch as she eased back the throttles. The aircraft trembled slightly, a deep vibration running through the fuselage. Every small movement now mattered. One wrong angle, one gust, and the entire plane could drift off alignment. Flaps 20 degrees, she said. Flaps 20, Jason confirmed. They dropped lower minus 6,000 feet. The runway grew larger, clearer. The city shimmered beneath a haze of sunlight. From the cabin behind them came silence. Not fear now, but awe. Passengers peered through the windows, watching the two fighter jets guiding them down like angels of steel. One little boy pointed, whispering, "Mom, they're flying with us." The mother squeezed his hand. "They're keeping us safe." Altitude 5,000, Jason called. Sarah adjusted the pitch trim. "Hydraulics holding?" "For now," he said. "But we're losing a little on the left side." She nodded. Then we'll land clean. No drift. Jason exhaled, watching her hands. There was no tremor, no hesitation. Every movement was precise, controlled, deliberate, like muscle memory honed from years of flight that most people could only dream of. He realized then that he was watching one of the finest pilots alive do what she was born to do. As they broke through 3,000 feet, Montgomery Tower came back on. Flight 237. Winds 8 knots cross from the west. Runway clear. You're number 1 for landing. Sarah's voice remained calm. Copy, Montgomery. Number 1 for landing. Then Colin's voice, quieter now, filled her ears. We'll take the high cover and clear your 6 Hawk 1. The runway's yours. She swallowed hard. Copy, 2-1. Thanks for the escort. There was a brief pause. Then came a sentence that froze her heart. Ma'am, the boys on base heard your call sign. The tower's gone silent. For a moment, she didn't breathe. Hawk 1, you still got it, Colin said softly. Welcome home. The words hit her like a wave. Welcome home. Her throat tightened, eyes blurring for the first time since she'd taken the controls. But she couldn't let it break her focus. Not yet. Gear down, she said. Jason pulled the lever. The gears locked into place with a reassuring thud. 3 green lights confirmed, he said. Good, she exhaled. Here we go. The runway stretched ahead, long and narrow, a perfect line of promise. The plane dipped lower, wind buffeting its sides. Sarah adjusted the rudder with small, exact movements. Speed 160, Jason reported. Keep it steady. The ground rushed up to meet them. The passengers gripped their seats, breaths held. Flaps full, Sarah ordered. Flaps full. The landing gear kissed the runway. For a second, it felt perfect, smooth, controlled. Then a sudden gust slammed from the left. The right wing dipped. The aircraft veered slightly. Jason shouted, "Crosswind." "I've got it." Sarah corrected instantly, pushing opposite rudder and countering with a burst of throttle. The plane straightened. The wheels hit solid ground again, skidding slightly before gripping the wet tarmac. They were down. Cheers erupted from the cabin. People cried, clapped, hugged. But Sarah kept her hands on the controls until the aircraft rolled to a stop. She didn't let go until the engines spooled down, the vibrations fading into silence. Flight 237, welcome to Montgomery, the tower said softly. Runway clear. Emergency teams are approaching. Sarah finally leaned back in her seat, exhaling a long breath. Jason just stared at her, half stunned, half in awe. You did it, he whispered. She smiled faintly. We did it. Outside, the 2 F-22 Raptors circled once overhead, their wings glinting in sunlight. Then they dipped in unison, a silent, perfect formation salute. The crowd that had gathered near the runway, reporters, paramedics, airmen, all looked up. They knew that maneuver. It wasn't protocol. It was tribute. In that moment, every Air Force veteran on base stood still. They all knew the name Hawk 1, the pilot who had led her squadron through fire, who had saved lives and vanished quietly afterward. And now she had returned, not in a fighter jet, but at the controls of a wounded passenger plane she refused to let die. As the Raptors disappeared into the sky, the radio crackled one last time. Hawk 1, this is Raptor 2-1. You brought them home again. It's been an honor, ma'am. Her voice was quiet when she answered. The honor's mine, 2-1. Safe skies. The channel went silent. Sarah removed her headset slowly. Her hands were trembling now, not from fear, but from the release of everything she'd held together. Jason sat back, shaking his head with a laugh of disbelief. I don't think anyone's ever going to forget this. She gave a soft, tired smile. That's not why I did it. He looked at her. Then why? She gazed out the cockpit window where the sun glowed across the wet runway. Because someone once brought me home when they didn't have to. I owed it forward. Outside, fire trucks and ambulances approached, lights flashing in the morning sun. Airport crews surrounded the aircraft, guiding passengers down the emergency stairs. But the cameras were already turning toward the cockpit. Someone had leaked the name. Hawk 1. And before the day ended, that call sign, spoken in silence and reverence by 2 F-22 pilots, would echo through every military channel. Every news network, and every heart that still believed in what courage looked like at 30,000 feet. The engines had gone silent, but the echoes of that landing still vibrated through every heart on board. The smell of burnt fuel lingered faintly in the cabin as rescue trucks surrounded the aircraft, their red lights flashing like slow, pulsing heartbeats. Captain Sarah Holden sat motionless in the cockpit, staring through the windshield at the growing crowd on the runway. Paramedics, security officers, air traffic crew. And beyond them, people holding up phones, cameras flashing in the morning light. She removed her headset, slowly, deliberately. Every muscle in her arms ached. Beside her, Jason Grant slumped back in his seat, his voice hoarse. I can't believe we're actually on the ground. Sarah managed a small smile. You did good, Jason. He turned toward her. No, you did it. You saved all of us. She shook her head. No one flies alone. Remember that. Outside, the sound of footsteps and radio chatter filled the air. The emergency door opened with a hiss, letting in the scent of rain and jet fuel. Medics rushed aboard to check passengers. Some cried, others clapped, some just sat in stunned silence. But amid the commotion, a quiet murmur began spreading among the rescue crew. A name whispered like something half-remembered from legend. That's her. Who? Hawk 1. Sarah felt the weight of it instantly. She'd tried to bury that name, the call sign that had defined her for nearly a decade. But like echoes across the clouds, it had found her again. By the time she stepped out of the cockpit, the tarmac was crowded. Cameras turned in her direction, microphones extended, flashes going off. She squinted against the light, exhaustion drawing faint lines across her face. A reporter shouted, Captain Holden, how did you manage to land that aircraft in a storm with one engine down? Another called out, is it true you were a decorated Air Force pilot? She didn't answer. She walked past them slowly, her boots echoing against the wet pavement, heading toward the first group of medics helping passengers off the plane. Everyone accounted for? She asked. A paramedic nodded. Yes, ma'am. No serious injuries. A few shock cases, but they'll be fine. Sarah exhaled, the kind of deep, trembling breath that feels like it's been held for hours. Good, she said softly. That's all that matters. Jason came up beside her, his flight jacket draped over one shoulder. Captain, the tower's asking for you. She glanced toward the terminal, where several uniformed officers stood waiting. Not airport security, Air Force personnel. Her heart tightened. Inside the operations building, the noise of the runway faded into sterile quiet. She followed a young lieutenant down the corridor, his boots squeaking on the polished floor. He was nervous. She could tell from the way his hand twitched on the folder he carried. Ma'am, he said, voice careful. There are people who'd like to speak with you. They entered a briefing room. Plain, gray walls, a few chairs, a coffee pot that looked untouched. Waiting there were two men. Colonel Mark Hensley, a senior officer she recognized from her Air Force days, and Major Emily Ross, once her subordinate, now clearly promoted. Captain Holden, Hensley said, rising. It's been a long time. She nodded. Yes, sir. He gestured for her to sit. Word travels fast. Before the news cycle catches it, we wanted to hear it from you directly. Sarah sat down slowly. There's not much to tell. Engine failure. Severe storm. I did what anyone else would have done. Hensley's expression softened, but his voice remained firm. Not anyone else. You guided a commercial airliner through a thundercell with one functional hydraulic system and landed without casualties. 2 of our best fighter pilots say you flew that thing like a tactical jet. Sarah gave a faint, tired smile. Old habits. Major Ross leaned forward. When Collins called your call sign, the base fell silent. No one could believe it. Sarah's eyes lowered to the table. I didn't plan for that. I didn't want attention. Hensley studied her. Then why did you leave, Holden? After Afghanistan? You could have had command. You had the respect of everyone who ever flew under you. She hesitated. The memories came back sharp. The desert heat, the explosion, the empty chair at the debrief room table. I lost someone, she said quietly. One of my pilots. Collins Wingman. I never stopped hearing his voice. Hensley's tone softened. That wasn't your fault. Maybe not, she said. But I was his leader. And leaders are responsible. Silence filled the room for several long seconds. The only sound was the hum of the overhead lights. Then Ross spoke gently. You saved lives again today, Captain. Maybe that's how you make peace with the past. An hour later, Sarah stepped back outside. The crowd had thinned, the emergency vehicles gone. Only a handful of airport staff and a few reporters remained. But across the runway, something caught her eye. 2 figures in flight suits standing near a refueling truck. The Raptors. They were there, helmets tucked under their arms, talking with ground crew. When they saw her, they straightened immediately. Collins, older now, broader-shouldered, but unmistakably the same man she'd once commanded, walked toward her, rain-soaked boots splashing across puddles. He stopped a few feet away and gave a crisp salute. Ma'am? She returned it automatically. Collins. He smiled faintly. Didn't think I'd ever get to say that call sign again. Neither did I. They stood in silence for a moment, both aware that no words could really fill the years between them. You flew beautifully, he said finally. Even in that storm, it was like watching Hawk 1 all over again. She met his eyes. You didn't do bad yourself, Lieutenant. He laughed softly. It's Major now, ma'am. Her smile widened. I see that. Then his tone grew serious. You know, when the tower said your name, the whole base went quiet. Even the new recruits knew what it meant. Sarah looked toward the horizon, where the storm clouds were finally breaking apart. It's just a name. He shook his head. No, it's a reminder of what it means to lead when everyone else is losing control. For the first time in years, she didn't argue. She just watched the Raptors in the distance, their metal skin glinting in the new sunlight. Will you go back? Collins asked quietly. The Air Force could use someone like you again. She smiled faintly. No, my war's over. He studied her for a moment, then nodded. Then maybe this was your last mission. Maybe. They stood together in silence, the kind that comes only between people who have faced the same storms and survived. Finally, Collins broke the stillness. You know what the guys back on base said? What? He grinned. They said, Hawk 1 didn't just land a plane. She brought the sky home. Sarah chuckled softly, shaking her head. You tell them not to turn me into a legend again. He smirked. Too late. As he walked back toward his jet, Sarah lingered, watching the sunlight hit the wet tarmac. The world had quieted now. The storm had passed. Jason approached, carrying 2 cups of coffee from the airport lounge. You okay, Captain? She took one with a nod. Yeah, I think I am. He looked up as the two F-22s began taxiing for takeoff again, engines roaring softly in the distance. They're leaving. Sarah smiled faintly. They'll always be there when someone needs them. The jets began to roll, speeding down the runway. Just before liftoff, both pilots dipped their wings, a gesture of respect. Sarah raised her cup in salute. Clear skies, boys. The Raptors soared upward, disappearing into the morning haze, silent, sleek, and eternal. For the first time in years, Captain Sarah Holden felt at peace, not because the world remembered her, but because she remembered who she was. The following morning, the world woke up to her story. The storm that had battered the California coast had cleared, replaced by a golden sunrise that seemed symbolic, as if the sky itself was trying to make amends. But inside the newsroom at CNN, Fox, and BBC, the morning anchors were already repeating the same headline in astonished tones. Commercial flight landed in thunderstorm by former Air Force captain. F-22 pilots escort civilian jets safely to ground. Photos of the event flooded every corner of the internet. The image of Sarah Holden stepping out of the cockpit, rain-soaked, eyes steady. The blurred shot of two Raptors circling above the crippled airliner. The passengers clapping and crying as the plane's wheels hit the tarmac. Within hours, hashtags began trending worldwide. Hashtag Hawk 1, hashtag Captain Holden, hashtag the storm landing. But while the world cheered, Sarah sat alone in a small hotel room near Lax. The blinds drawn, her flight uniform still damp. The air smelled faintly of stale coffee and disinfectant. Her phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Unknown numbers. Messages from reporters. A voicemail from a morning show producer. Even a request from the Pentagon's media office asking for a formal statement. She hadn't answered any of them. Jason had texted her a few times too. Captain, everyone wants to talk to you. The airline's already preparing a press release. You're trending everywhere. She'd only replied with 3 words, let them talk. She didn't want fame. She wanted quiet. By noon, there was a knock at her door. Sarah hesitated, then opened it. Standing there was Major Emily Ross, the same Air Force officer who'd been at the debrief room the night before, now in civilian clothes, holding 2 coffees. Thought you might not have had breakfast, Ross said softly. Sarah managed a tired smile. You guessed right. Ross handed her the cup and stepped inside. You've seen the news? Sarah nodded. Hard to avoid. They've turned it into a movie already. Ross chuckled. You should see what they're saying online. Someone dug up your old flight records. Half the Air Force is sharing footage of your last combat landing in Kandahar. You're basically the internet's favorite pilot. I didn't do it for that, Sarah said quietly. I know, but maybe people need stories like yours right now. Sarah leaned back against the wall. They don't even know me. All they see is a headline. Ross studied her for a long moment. Maybe, but you gave them something real. In a world full of noise, you reminded people what calm under pressure looks like. Later that day, she finally agreed to meet the airline's PR director in the hotel lobby. Cameras waited outside like vultures, but the lobby itself was calm, soft jazz playing. Travelers wheeling suitcases past, unaware of the storm brewing online. The director, Mark Leland, was young, sharply dressed, with the cautious smile of someone balancing gratitude and corporate anxiety. Captain Holden, he began, shaking her hand. On behalf of the airline, I want to thank you personally. You saved 146 lives yesterday. You're a hero. She shook her head. I was just doing my job. He smiled thinly. Of course. But the world sees it differently. Every major network wants an interview. Morning shows, news specials, documentaries. If you want to tell your story, On your terms, now's the time. Sarah looked away. You mean now's the time to make it profitable? He blinked, thrown off. That's not what She raised a hand. I'm not interested in fame. I did my duty. That's all. He hesitated, then nodded. Understood. But just know, whether you speak or not, the story will be told. It always is. That night, Sarah turned on the TV for the first time since the landing. Every channel carried her face. Some called her America's Miracle. Pilot. Others described her as a ghost from the Air Force. Passed, and then she saw something that made her freeze, a segment on a military channel replaying old footage of her call sign briefing in Afghanistan. Call sign Hawk 1, known for precision maneuvers, low-altitude storm navigation, and unflinching leadership under fire. The footage showed her younger self, eyes fierce, voice steady, briefing her team before a mission. And beside her, barely visible in the frame, was Lieutenant Aaron Cole, the pilot she'd lost. Her throat tightened. She muted the TV, closing her eyes. For a moment, the years between then and now collapsed into one memory. The dust, the radio static, the scream of engines, and the explosion that ended it all. She whispered his name under her breath, as if he could still hear her. The next morning, she went to the airfield early, before sunrise. The world was quiet again, the runway glistening with dew. 2 F-22s sat parked at the far end, their silhouettes framed against the growing light. Collins was there, talking with mechanics. When he saw her, he smiled and waved her over. Couldn't sleep? He asked. She shook her head. Never could after a storm. He nodded knowingly. The news hit us hard, too. You're famous again, you know. I don't want to be. I know. But sometimes you don't get to choose that. Sometimes the sky decides for you. He motioned toward the F-22 beside him. Care to see her again? Sarah hesitated, then stepped closer. The sleek metal shimmered under the dawn light. She reached out, her hand brushing against the cold fuselage. The scent of fuel and rain brought back memories, hundreds of hours spent inside a cockpit like this one, where fear and freedom blended into one. I miss it, she admitted quietly. You never really left, Collins said. You just took the sky with you wherever you went. By midday, her story had reached the White House. The president issued a brief statement praising her courage, calling her a symbol of American resolve. The Pentagon confirmed her decorated service history. But what caught her by surprise was the letter hand-delivered by a courier that afternoon. It was on official Air Force stationery, signed by General Whitaker. Chief of Staff, Captain Sarah Holden. Your actions on Flight 94 exemplify the highest traditions of the United States Air Force, even in retirement. You remain, and will always remain, one of ours. Consider this an invitation to speak at the upcoming Air Force Academy graduation. The cadets deserve to hear from the pilot who reminded the nation what honor looks like in motion. Respectfully, General Whitaker. Sarah read it twice, then set it down, staring out the window. The thought of standing in front of 1,000 young cadets made her heart race. She hadn't spoken publicly since Afghanistan. But something inside her stirred, not pride, but purpose. Maybe this was what Aaron would have wanted. 2 weeks later, she stood on the stage of the Air Force Academy in Colorado Springs. The sky was a perfect blue, dotted with clouds like scattered feathers. Rows of cadets sat before her in immaculate uniforms, the future of aviation gleaming in their eyes. Behind her, on the runway, 2 F-22s stood ready for the graduation flyover. Sarah adjusted the microphone, the applause fading into respectful silence. I wasn't planning on speaking again, she began. Her voice was steady, carrying across the open air. But life has a way of giving you missions you didn't ask for. A ripple of soft laughter ran through the crowd. I've spent most of my life in the sky, she continued. And if there's one thing I've learned, it's this. Courage doesn't mean flying without fear. It means flying anyway. She paused, her eyes scanning the sea of young faces. When you're up there, and everything goes wrong, the systems fail, the storm hits, and the radio goes dead, you find out who you are. Not in the medals, not in the headlines, but in that 1 second when you decide whether to give up or push through. She smiled faintly. Yesterday, I landed a plane, but years ago, I almost didn't come home. I thought my story ended in the desert. Turns out, life had one more flight planned for me. The cadets sat still, hanging on every word. So whatever storms you face, in the air or down here on the ground, remember this. You don't have to be fearless. You just have to keep flying. The crowd erupted in applause. Some cadets even stood, saluting her. Sarah's throat tightened. She saluted back. Above, the F-22s roared into the sky, splitting into formation. As they streaked overhead, one of them dipped its wings, a silent tribute. She didn't need to look to know who was in that cockpit. Collins, of course. The sound echoed like thunder, but this time it wasn't fear. It was freedom. As the ceremony ended, Ross approached her backstage. You did it, she said softly. Sarah smiled. No, we did. Ross grinned. So what now, Hawk One? Sarah looked up at the sky, the endless, forgiving blue. Maybe I'll teach. Maybe I'll write. Or maybe I'll just finally rest. Then she added, almost to herself, but whatever I do, I'll never stop looking up. That evening, as the sun dipped below the Rockies, she sat on a small hill overlooking the academy. The roar of jets had faded, replaced by the whisper of wind through the grass. She pulled a small photo from her pocket, a young pilot smiling beside her jet. Call sign Falcon 2. Made it home, Aaron, she whispered. For both of us. A gentle breeze swept across the field, carrying her words into the horizon. And for the first time in years, Captain Sarah Holden felt the quiet peace of a mission truly complete. Months had passed since the storm landing. The world had moved on, as it always does. But Captain Sarah Holden's name still lingered in the quiet corners of people's memories. Every now and then, she'd see a headline online, The Miracle Pilot, Who Landed the Storm Plane, or a short documentary clip circulating again. But she never watched them. She didn't need to. Her story didn't belong on screens or in headlines. It belonged to the skies, the only place she ever truly understood herself. Sarah now lived in Colorado Springs, a few miles from the Air Force Academy where she'd given her speech. Her small home overlooked the foothills, where the mountains met the horizon. Every morning, she'd walk to a nearby hangar, a quiet airfield where old pilots gathered to talk engines, swap stories, and tinker with aircraft that smelled of oil and history. She'd bought a small Beechcraft Bonanza, a single-engine plane that had seen better days. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't fast. But it had soul. And that, she thought, was enough. One chilly morning in late autumn, she was at the hangar tightening bolts on the Bonanza's wing when she heard footsteps behind her. Figured I'd find you here, came a familiar voice. She turned, Major Collins, still in uniform, holding 2 coffees. You drink too much coffee, Major, she said with a faint grin. And you don't drink enough, he replied, handing her one. Besides, I had a reason to visit. She raised an eyebrow. This isn't a PR stunt, is it? He laughed. No. Just thought you should know something. The Air Force is naming a new leadership award after you, the Hawk One Valor Citation. It'll go to pilots who show courage and calm under impossible odds. Sarah froze. They don't need to do that. They already did. It's official. She stared at him for a long moment, unsure what to feel. Pride, grief, humility. It all blended together. After a silence, she said softly, "I didn't fly that day for medals." "I know," Colin said. "That's why you deserve it." Over the following weeks, Sarah started teaching part-time at the academy, not as a professor, but as a guest instructor for simulation training. Her classroom was always full. Cadets came not just to learn maneuvers or emergency procedures, but to hear her stories, not the ones on TV, but the ones no one knew. Nights over Afghanistan when the radio went dead. The first time she flew solo over the Atlantic. The sound of wind at 30,000 feet. When you realize the only thing keeping you alive is your decision-making. One cadet, a quiet young woman named Ava Martinez, reminded Sarah of herself. Sharp, determined, but carrying something heavy behind her eyes. One afternoon after class, Ava lingered behind. "Captain Holden?" she asked. "Sarah," she corrected gently. "I retired the captain part." Ava smiled shyly. "Sarah, I just wanted to say thank you. My brother was on that flight you landed. He doesn't talk about it much, but he says you changed how he sees life." Sarah's eyes softened. "How so?" "He says when he thought the plane was going down, he realized he hadn't told people he loved them enough. Now he never ends a day without doing it." Sarah felt her throat tighten. "He's a smart man." Ava hesitated. "And you changed how I see flying. You made me believe calm is stronger than courage." Sarah smiled. "It is, because calm is courage." Winter came. Snow blanketed the airfield, muffling the world in soft silence. Sarah still flew the Bonanza when weather allowed. Short flights, nothing fancy. Sometimes she'd take cadets up, sometimes she'd go alone, chasing sunsets the way some people chase peace. One afternoon, she got a call from the Smithsonian Air and Space Museum in Washington, D.C. They wanted her uniform, the one she wore the day she landed the plane, for a new exhibit titled "The Spirit of Flight." She hesitated, staring at the message for a long time before replying. "You can have the uniform, but keep the story about the passengers. They were the real reason we made it home." By spring, she'd begun writing a memoir, reluctantly at first, then with quiet rhythm. It wasn't about glory or survival. It was about stillness in motion, the art of not panicking when the world shakes. Her first line read, "Every pilot learns how to fly. The great ones learn how to breathe." The book would eventually sell millions, translated into dozens of languages, used by flight schools and leadership academies alike. But to Sarah, it was never about fame. It was about giving people a compass, a way to navigate their own storms. One bright June morning, Collins returned again, this time with 2 cadets and a small surprise. "We're hosting a commemorative flyover for the anniversary of your landing," he said. "Thought you might want to join. Just a short route over the coast." Sarah chuckled. "You really think I can still keep up with your Raptors?" He grinned. "We'll slow down for you." The day of the flight, she stood beside her Bonanza as crews prepared the Raptors. The crowd gathered reporters, cadets, families. But this time, she wasn't nervous. As the engines roared to life, she climbed into her cockpit, flipping switches with practiced ease. Her heart beat steady, her breath slow. "Raptor lead to Hawk 1. Colin's voice came through her headset. "Ready to take her home one more time?" Sarah smiled. "Always, Major." The Bonanza lifted gracefully off the runway, followed by 2 F-22s in perfect formation, one on each side. The sunlight glinted off their wings, dazzling against the endless blue. They flew east over the ocean. The air shimmered with warmth and memory. At 8,000 feet, Colin's voice came again, soft and reverent. Hawk 1, this is Raptor Lead. On behalf of every pilot you've inspired, it's an honor to share the sky with you. For a moment, Sarah couldn't speak. She looked out across the horizon, the curve of the earth, the glimmer of the water, the clouds rolling below like white waves. She finally replied, her voice calm and steady. Copy that, Raptor Lead. And remember, it's not about the wings. It's about what you carry in your heart. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was sacred. Then, one by one, the Raptors dipped their wings, the same way they had that day on the runway. A silent salute. Sarah smiled through misted eyes. Clear skies, boys. She banked gently, the Bonanza gliding through sunlight like a whisper. When they landed, a crowd erupted into applause. Reporters swarmed again, but this time, Sarah didn't walk past them. She paused, removed her headset, and said simply, I didn't fly alone. None of us ever do. Then she walked away, toward the hangar, toward peace, toward the quiet sky she'd always loved. That evening, as the sun set behind the mountains, Sarah stood outside her hangar, watching the last rays fade. She felt a strange, beautiful stillness, a kind that comes not from flying, but from finally coming home. Somewhere above, an F-22 streaked across the horizon, contrail glowing gold in the fading light. Sarah raised her hand in salute. And though the world would remember her as Hawk 1, she knew the truth. She wasn't just the woman who landed the storm plane. She was the one who showed the world how to fly through fear and come out the other side whole. End of story, approx. 1,200 words.